Greetings music fans and welcome to BC's Vinyl Odyssey, episode 3. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite musicians, Chick Corea. So without further ado, cue the titles. Today I'm not going to talk about one, but 3 albums associated with Chick Corea released between 1974 and 1976. These are my favorite Return to Forever albums. I like to think that these 3 albums have the definitive and classic lineup of the band. Chick Corea on keyboards, Stanley Clarke on bass, Al Di Meola on guitar, and Lenny White on drums. But first, let's go back to 1972, where our story begins. Chick Corea released the first Return to Forever album in 1972. Although still considered jazz fusion or electric jazz, this is a very different beast to the albums that followed. The music is rooted in Brazilian and Spanish and flamenco styles. Complementing Chick on these albums are Flora Purim on vocals, Airto on percussion, Joe Farrell on reeds, and Stanley Clarke on bass. And this was the only album that was released on the German ECM label. So as you can imagine from ECM, the reverb was cranked up to 11, and they probably had about 2 hours to mix it. Return to Forever followed on with 2 albums, both released in 1973, Light as a Feather and Hymn of the Seventh Galaxy. Light as a Feather can kind of be seen as a sequel to the self-titled album, but Hymn of the Seventh Galaxy introduced guitars in the guise of Bill Connors and Lenny White on drums. This was the first album to draw heavily on the rock and funk influences of the day. In 1974, Chick Corea made 2 important changes to the band. Firstly, Bill Connors on guitar was replaced by 19-year-old boy wonder, Al Di Meola. Secondly, Chick introduced synthesizers such as the Vinyl Odyssey into the band. Where Have I Known You Before was the first to feature the new lineup. Recorded in 1974 at the record plant in New York between July and August and released in September of the same year. This was very much jazz fusion influenced by progressive rock. Now, one quirky aspect of this album is the inclusion of 3 short solo piano pieces. The third of these, the title track, is built on a 2-chord ostinato pattern as a basis for improvisation. Now, I'm quite sure that Chick was influenced by Bill Evans because in 1959, Bill composed a piece called Peace Piece, also with a 2-chord ostinato figure. Sound familiar? Now, the first track on this album is a piece of music by Stanley Clarke called Vulcan Worlds. Now, there seems to be a connection here because the same year, on his self-titled album, he had a track called Vulcan Princess. I'm really curious about this. Was Stanley Clarke a Star Trek fan? What's the connection here? Can someone leave me a comment and explain this? Let's take a look at the sleeve of the record. This record and No Mystery both had the same production team, engineered and mixed by Shelley Yakus and mastered by Tom Rabstinek. Although these 2 gentlemen were both considered by some to be the best in the business, I don't think they got the sound right for Return to Forever. I think it's also to do with Chick still finding his sound with his newly acquired synthesizers. Where Have I Known You Before and No Mystery were both released on Polydor. This is a US Monarch pressing, designated by the MR in the dead wax. The record sounds punchy and has a decent soundstage, but it's no sonic marvel. The cover, like a lot of US releases in the early 70s, is thick cardboard. I don't find it the most inspiring cover, and Neville Potter, who also contributes to some poetry on the back, came up with this concept. It's harder to find this particular pressing for a decent price, but I do recommend you look for a US pressing, which might cost around £30. Chick Corea and gang followed up Where Have I Known You Before with No Mystery. The band returned to the record plant in New York in January 1975. The album was released the following month. The title track won Chick a Grammy for Best Instrumental Performance. Musically, This can be seen as a sequel to the previous one. No Mystery certainly has some interesting track titles. We have Jungle Waterfall, Flight of the Newborn, Sophisti-Funk, and my favourite title, Excerpt from the First Movement of Heavy Metal. Now this track sounds nothing like what we now associate with the metal genre. The track starts with a classical piano flourish, it goes into a funky blues rock groove with a disco-like bass line, and ends with more classical flourishes. What were you thinking, chick? No Mystery had the same production team I mentioned earlier. This is the first UK pressing. The lacquer was cut at Phonodisc in the glamorous Walthamstow area of London. I've compared this to the US version, and I actually think the US version sounds slightly better. It's a very similar sound to Where Have I Known You Before, though. The sleeve concept was by Neville Potter again. Art direction by Bill Levy. You should be able to pick up a decent copy of this for around £15 to £20. In 1976, the band signed with Columbia Records to record in what is, in my opinion, the greatest Return to Forever album, Romantic Warrior. The album was recorded at Caribou Ranch in Colorado, and I think the move away from the record plant in New York gives the album a completely different sound. Musically, this has the most extreme progressive rock influences, and Chick surrounded himself with an arsenal of keyboards and synthesizers, including acoustic piano, Fender Rhodes, Hohner clavinet, Mini Moog, Moog 15, Micro Mini Moog, Vinyl Odyssey, Yamaha organ, and Polymoog. Romantic Warrior was hugely commercially successful, climbing to number 35 in the US Billboard charts. A huge feat for a jazz rock album. However, not everyone liked it. Noted rock fusion despising critic Robert Christgau wrote this about the record. Jazz rock's answer to Emerson, Lake and Palmer, the worst of both worlds, D+. Thanks, Robert. Romantic Warrior benefits from a fresh production team. This album sounds incredible. Chick has now found his unique voice with his collection of synths. The instrument separation and soundstage are perfect. The album was engineered and mixed by Dennis McKay and had further remixing at Trident Studios in London. It certainly has some Trident magic on it. This is the US first Columbia pressing. I've compared this to the UK version, and this has a warmer sound. The UK maybe has more highs, but this has a more balanced sound. I really love this cover, which was designed by Wilson McLean. This is the insert that goes with the UK version. More poetry by our buddy Neville Potter. Now, if you want to buy this record, the UK version costs around £15, and for the US version, which I recommend, it might cost you around £30. Now, before I sum up, let's have a quick word from this week's sponsor. Thank you, Mila the cat, this week's sponsor. Now, if someone came up to me with a machete and put it against my neck and said, pick a favourite track from these 3 albums, I would actually have to choose the last track from Romantic Warrior, Duel of the Jester and the Tyrant. I'll never forget the first time I heard Chick's Mini Moog solo on this track. It really blew my mind. Chick's been a huge musical influence on me over the years, and I was deeply saddened in 2021 when he suddenly passed. I've really enjoyed talking about Chick Corea this week, and I look forward to seeing you again on BC's Vinyl Odyssey.